15 years ago, my fancy LCD monitor gave up the ghost. I can't entirely remember why or how it happened because it was 15 years ago. But I ended up with a second-hand replacement courtesy of my then girlfriend's father, a black generic CRT monitor from the tail end of the previous decade. The aspect ratio was different, the hum was something I don't particularly recall enjoying, and you could cook eggs on it if you left it running for an hour or so. But it worked, and that meant gaming. Being me, I thought to myself, hey, I could run some DOS games on this, and they'd look the same way I remember them being in the 90s. As since the move to liquid crystal, I'd discovered what so many others had then and since. Games look better in your memory than they do when blowing up to HD standards. This is usually the part where I mention installing all my old games, but they were already on the drive. What game to try it out on? There was only one answer. And as I went flying through the missions and observing the obvious blur and lamenting the lack of clarity in general, my brain interjected and pointed out, this is looking much better than when you played it on the LCD the other day. How could this be? The resolution was lower, surely. The blur was up there with an old television. And the more modern screen would have had a better refresh rate and display things in a superior fashion, right? Well, no. The CRT displayed colours better than my old LCD. It had less latency between the twitch of my joystick and it happening on screen. It smoothed out the jagged edges of my games with a natural anti-aliasing effect. The VSync issues and tearing were gone. Speaking of smoothness, the game in question felt smoother. The refresh rate of the monitor was superb. Everything just felt right, like some frame division was happening secretly that wasn't before. The CRT handled resolution switching better too, meaning there was no nearest neighbour blurring or the need for DOSBox scalers. So while there was some blur, it was nowhere near as distracting as I expected it to be. LCDs had been around for 18 years at that point. You'd think they would have figured out how to make the technology better than the one it was replacing, right? Well, that's not always how it works. CRTs have been available since the 1920s, and the collective minds of all of humanity had been given 80 years to improve and enhance them. In the mid-2000s, you were switching from a completely researched and upgraded way of viewing things to a relatively new technology that was still developing. LCDs are the televisual equivalent of handhelds in a way. They're cheap and more portable and disposable than their predecessors. They're more energy efficient and easier to throw at people you dislike. And it's much easier to make larger versions of them in order to beam higher definition content into your consumers' homes. It's a case of convenience rather than improvement though, as more and more media publications are starting to point out. The retro games look better, and even the modern ones look better on CRTs. If you discount the fact that the aspect ratio standard changed. Even then, widescreen CRTs existed, they just weren't commonplace. It's not a popular opinion, but people glamorize old technology, regularly implying that it's superior to what we have now. And outside of perhaps a build quality argument and some of the mechanical keyboards, which are both bolstered by survivorship bias, there's very little that these old computers could do that was superior to their modern day replacements. Most people repair or preserve computers in a nostalgic haze, not because it's better, but because it harkens back to better times for them. I'm no stranger to this, because I once mourned the passing of an early 2000s plasma screen television that had served me for thousands of hours. It had a terrible humming sound. There was burn-in on the screen, the aspect ratio was a constant failing battle to get right, but some of my fondest gaming memories were bound up in that screen and its rectangular pixels, despite its technical limitations. Not so with CRTs. Even to this day they have a leg up on LCDs, after over 30 years of development and improvement of the latter. It doesn't matter how good you improve liquid crystal, it can't physically transmit information at the same speed as electron beams of CRTs, and any attempt to do so results in motion blur, which everyone should rightly hate. Over the past 15 years, display manufacturers have come to terms with this, and the OLED was eventually touted as the replacement for the LCD. While, as of writing this, costs are still prohibitively expensive for mass adoption, the color range and response times of these monitors are comparable to the CRT. I could go into great depth about the technical details of the various monitors, but this is an opinion piece, so I'm not going to. The only area it really falls down in is that it's still a fixed pixel display, so there's no multi-syncing and there's still scaling involved. So if you don't have the old tech still functioning, and you don't have a wallet bursting with cash, you'll most likely be stuck with an LCD. There are things you can do about that though. As I've mentioned in the past, the retro games we enjoy were designed on CRTs, and intended to be played on CRTs, with the pixelated style masked to a degree by the natural processing of the image by the hardware in question. So while it's nice to have crisp, non-filtered pixel art blown up onto your screen so that you can absorb every pixel, other players may actively dislike this look because it doesn't feel like it did in their past. DOSBox and Mister offer filters that replicate the feel of particular CRTs, as evidenced by my experimentation with Doom in the past. The default DOSBox scalers are limited, and there are more recent implementations like DOSBox Pure that offer even more image manipulation options through RetroArch, so you can tweak and alter the display of a game on your LCD until you get that feel right. There's all kinds of talk online about color replication and feel and recollection versus reality, with many communities swearing by CRT and nothing else, and others happy with LCDs so long as the shaders are right, and others still going to bat for OLEDs. Sorry, Plasma, nobody wants to game on you. Thing is, it's all subjective. While how the images are created are objective, how we perceive the images presented to us is all in the mind and the actual eye. As some of you have already noticed, I'm shade colorblind. I have a limited range of colors that I can enjoy, and that's that. My eyesight is also starting to deteriorate with age. My reflexes are starting to diminish. My right hand in particular is in need of All of these external factors affect how important certain aspects of gaming are to me. I can certainly still notice input lag and response time differences, but they're just hampering something that's already been hampered, because I have biological input lag. Likewise, I can see a difference in color depth, but the magnitude of the difference is entirely lost upon me. Much as my inability to play platformers makes me uniquely unqualified to play and enjoy them while others watch, my inability to appreciate the differences in displays should make me unqualified to talk about the subject beyond the technical level. Except I've played on native systems and emulated systems, and I can feel the difference. If someone with compromised senses can experience a difference, what kind of change is period hardware going to make for someone with more finely attuned senses? Despite this, all the hardware in the world is just a gateway to your enjoyment. And when you're truly immersed in something and the peripherals have facilitated that immersion, then you don't really focus on that anymore. When effective hardware coupled with a good game does their respective jobs correctly, you won't notice the method of input and display, and you won't be distracted by anything outside of the game itself. I could play the likes of Morrowind or StarCraft on a 14-inch monitor with washed out colour and bad flickering, and they'd still draw me in despite the limitations surrounding my senses. So that's why for many, playing on a CRT or OLED isn't going to be a significant departure from a decent LCD. But for others, the experience of a game isn't just the game itself, it's the surrounding environment that presents the game. Which is why to them, nothing can beat that period-specific feel of a big beige monitor and a mechanical keyboard, attached to a genuine device rather than a modern machine attempting to emulate one. Whether refresh rates and response times and color depths and flickering and scaling make a difference to you depends entirely upon the person you are. And for some, it's a poisoned chalice, because once they've experienced the hum and glow of playing classics through a CRT display, there isn't really anything comparable, and that's a feeling that's been lost in the modern era, because the hardware is simply not being mass-produced anymore. A day will come when the last CRT will fail, and all we'll have are stories about how it felt different, how it felt better. In the meantime, enjoy them while they last, because the prices are starting to skyrocket, as more unscrupulous people realize just how much gamers want the real McCoy. Fortunately for us, no matter what hardware we're gaming on, the great games that were designed for these CRT monitors remain playable to this day. Which is why I encourage you, whether you have a CRT or not, to give DOS gaming its due.